Before the sun rises over the cold hills of Ice Age Asia, the day has already begun. The world is blue-black and almost silent, except for wind moving over stone, the faint shift of bodies inside a shelter, and the small living sound of embers being coaxed back into flame. No clock marks the hour. No word like work divides life from leisure, duty from rest, mourning from obligation. There is only warmth, hunger, weather, memory, and the slow opening of another day in a world that gives nothing cheaply. Somewhere beyond the shelter, animals have moved during the night. Frost has settled on grass, on hides, on stone tools left within reach. The people waking here do not think of themselves as prehistoric, and they do not know they are part of a mystery that will one day puzzle scientists across the world. They are simply human, or something so close to human that the difference will survive only as fragments a tooth, a piece of finger bone, traces of ancient DNA hidden in cave sediment, a legacy still carried quietly in living bodies thousands of generations later. At the centre of the morning is fire. It is not just a convenience. It is a boundary. On one side of it are cold, darkness, raw food, and a night that presses close. On the other side are heat, light, cooked marrow, sharpened points, familiar faces, and the possibility of sitting still long enough to remember yesterday and plan for what comes after dawn. Fire is not always easy to make, and in many ancient settings scholars still debate how often different human groups could kindle it at will, rather than preserve it carefully from one use to the next. That uncertainty matters because an ember is not only an ember, it is labour stored in advance. It is yesterday continuing into today. Someone has shielded it, fed it, watched it, and understood that a little red glow beneath ash can be more valuable than a heavy tool in the hand. The people near this flame may be Denisovans, though at this distance the word is only ours. They may share the cave world with Neanderthals at some times, or with early Homo sapiens at others, or they may belong to a branch of humanity that moves across Asia in ways the fossil record barely preserves. What survives in the record suggests that Ice Age human life is not a simple scene of constant panic and bare survival. It is demanding and shaped by hunger, but it is also skilled, social, observant, and rhythmic. A day begins not with a dramatic chase, but with maintenance. Ash is shifted, fuel is judged, a cutting edge is checked with a thumb, a hide is pulled tighter around shoulders, bits of bone, wood, plant fibre, stone, and skin lie around the living area, not as clutter, but as the equipment of an existence where nearly everything useful has passed through human hands. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, then stay with this morning a little longer, because the most important part of the ancient human day may be the part modern imagination often skips. Early humans do not spend every waking minute in a desperate fight against nature. They watch, they wait, they repair, they carry knowledge in bodies trained by repetition. A person rising in the half-light knows where the good stone comes from, where animals cross when snow begins to soften, which roots are worth digging, and which branches burn too quickly. This knowledge is not written down, and yet it is precise. It is a map made of memory, smell, touch, and caution. The morning air itself is information. Cold can tell a group whether water is frozen at the edge of a stream. Wind can carry the smell of herd animals, smoke from another fire, or the warning scent of a carcass already claimed by stronger mouths. Clouds over a ridge can change the plan before anyone has taken many steps. Ancient daily life is not organized by appointments, but it is not disorganized. It has its own discipline, built around energy. A long walk must be worth the calories it costs. Rest is not idleness if it preserves strength for the right moment. Movement is not wandering if it follows patterns older than any path. In a place like Denisova Cave, in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, these patterns become almost visible. The cave sits in a landscape of valleys, forest, open steppe, and seasonal change, a place that can draw animals, shelter humans, and preserve traces in layered sediments. Much later, scientists will find that this cave is not only a shelter but an archive, holding evidence of different human populations who used or passed through it at different times. Yet on an ordinary morning, it is not an archive. It is shade, cover, storage, memory, and perhaps a familiar return point in a wide territory. The people who use it may come and go, following animals, weather, raw materials, and opportunity. Around the hearth, the first tasks are quiet. Someone may break a bone for marrow left from an earlier meal, using a stone chosen not for beauty but for weight and grip. Someone else may scrape a hide, not in a romantic burst of invention, but because skin stiffens, cracks, rots, and must be worked again and again if it is to remain useful. A flake of stone may be retouched along one edge, turning a dull tool back into something sharp enough to cut sinew or plant stalk. The lesser-known truth of Stone Age life is that many tools are not grand weapons or ceremonial objects. They are ordinary, small, and easily overlooked flakes that cut briefly and are discarded. Hammerstones battered by repeated blows, scrapers shaped by necessity. Archaeology often finds the durable leftovers, especially stone, but the day itself would have been full of perishable things, wooden shafts, fibre cords, bedding, digging sticks, carrying bags, and worked hides. Most of that world vanishes. Because so much vanishes, the ancient morning must be reconstructed carefully. No single explanation fully accounts for what a Denisovan day looked like, or how much it resembled the day of Neanderthals, early Homo sapiens, or older humans before them. But certain patterns are likely because bodies require food. Cold requires insulation, fire requires fuel, and small groups require cooperation. Every day is a balance between what the landscape offers and what the group remembers. In that balance, daily life becomes a kind of intelligence spread across ordinary acts. As dawn strengthens, the first decisions begin to take shape. Some will stay closer to the hearth, tending materials, processing food, or keeping the resting place usable. Others will move outward, not randomly, but along known routes where stone, wood, water, plants, and animal signs can be found. The work is not a job. It is not separate from life. It is life, braided so tightly with observation and movement that the modern categories begin to fail. This is where the mystery becomes intimate. When people ask what early humans did all day before offices, wages, farms, kings, and cities, the answer is not simply that they survived. Early humans lived. They noticed patterns, made choices, returned to places, shared tasks, remembered failures, and carried the past into the next morning. They were beings with long days, skilled hands, aching feet, patience, and perhaps stories that rose with smoke into cold air and disappeared, and among them, somewhere across the immense distances of Ice Age Asia, were the Denisovans, almost invisible now, yet once as present to themselves as any person waking before dawn, reaching toward the fire and beginning again. The firelit morning around the cave is only one imagined moment, but the cave itself is real. It stands in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, not as a grand monument built by human hands, but as a natural chamber cut into limestone above a river valley, open to weather, animals, and passing human groups over immense spans of time. Denisova Cave does not look, at first glance, like the place where a new kind of human would step out of darkness and change the story of our origins. It is not a palace, not a temple, not a buried city with walls and streets. Its power is quieter than that. Layer by layer, season by season, it kept what people left behind when they warmed themselves, broke stone, carried food inside, rested, departed, returned, and eventually disappeared from memory so completely that no myth, name, or spoken tradition still points clearly back to them. For many years, the cave was important because it preserved a long record of Ice Age life. Archaeologists found stone tools, animal bones, ornaments, traces of occupation, and sediments stacked like pages of a book that had been written by weather and habit rather than ink. The Altai region itself is a crossroads, a place where open steppe, forested valleys, cold uplands, and migration routes meet. Animals pass through such landscapes because food and shelter change with the seasons. Humans pass through them for the same reason. A cave in such a place can become a recurring stop in a much wider world, not necessarily a permanent home, but a known point in a landscape of movement. For early humans, a cave is not simply shelter from rain or snow. It is a place where fire smoke stains stone, where scraps accumulate, where memory attaches itself to a wall or entrance, where the outside world can be watched from shadow. Yet the cave's greatest secret did not come from a complete skeleton. It did not come from a skull with a face that could be reconstructed in a museum display. It came from almost nothing. A small fragment of finger bone, a few teeth, tiny pieces that might once have seemed too modest to transform anything, became the doorway into a vanished population. The evidence remains incomplete, almost frustratingly so. The Denisovans are not known from rows of graves or abundant bones scattered across continents. They entered modern knowledge through genetic evidence so small that it feels almost accidental, and that is one reason their story carries such gravity. The discovery showed that the human past was not simply waiting to be seen. Some parts of it had to be read at the molecular level, from traces too damaged and too quiet for the eye alone. When scientists studied ancient DNA from the cave, the result did not fit neatly into what was already known. The genetic signal was not modern human. It was not Neanderthal, though it was related. It belonged to a sister lineage, a group that had shared ancestry with Neanderthals but had followed its own path. From that moment, Denisova Cave stopped being only an archaeological site and became a turning point in how scientists think about human history. A population with almost no recognizable body had appeared. A human group had been discovered not because its bones clearly announced it, but because its DNA refused to be mistaken for anyone else. This changed the emotional weight of ancient daily life. Before such discoveries, it was easier to picture the human past as a sequence of familiar figures, older hominins, Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Homo sapiens emerging in Africa and spreading outward. The real story is more tangled. Denisova Cave reveals a world in which different human populations overlap, separate, meet, exchange genes, and sometimes leave only the faintest signatures behind. The people who sat near fires here were not isolated symbols in a simple evolutionary ladder. They were part of a braided human landscape, where identity was not a clean line but a set of neighbouring branches, some visible, some hidden under earth. The cave also reminds us that an ordinary day can become evidence without anyone intending it. A tool dropped near a hearth, a tooth lost or left behind, ash from a fire, butchered animal bone, sediment pressed down by feet. All of these can wait tens of thousands of years for a future mind to ask what happened here. But archaeology is uneven. Stone survives better than wood. Teeth survive better than skin. Cold caves preserve better than open camps. The record is not a fair sample of ancient life. It is a strange survivor's archive, shaped by chemistry, climate, accident, and excavation. What survives in the record suggests presence, skill, and repetition, but it does not give back the full sound of a day. One of the most surprising developments is that even cave sediment can preserve ancient human DNA. Dirt itself can become a witness. In places where no visible human bone remains, microscopic traces may still reveal that humans were there. This is a profound shift. It means the floor of a cave is not just background. It can contain genetic echoes from bodies, waste, skin cells, hair, and other biological traces that vanished as objects but remained as molecules. For a story like the Denisovans, this matters enormously, because their physical fossils are so scarce. A handful of fragments can be joined by invisible evidence spread through layers of earth, allowing scientists to detect presence where the human body itself has disappeared. Still, every discovery deepens the mystery rather than closing it. A genome can show kinship, mixture, and population history, but it cannot easily show the shape of a day. DNA can reveal that Denisovans were close relatives of Neanderthals and distant relatives of modern humans, but it cannot tell us exactly how they carried water, how they divided tasks, how often they returned to the same shelter, or what they noticed when the weather changed over the valley. It can show that they existed across deep time, but not what their voices sounded like in the cave mouth at dusk. The more powerful the science becomes, the more visible the missing human texture appears. Denisova Cave is especially haunting because it was not used by Denisovans alone. Evidence from the site points to a long and complicated sequence of human occupation, including Neanderthals and later modern humans. At certain times, the cave seems less like the home of one people and more like a recurring shelter in a contested, shared, or alternating landscape. One famous genetic discovery from the cave even revealed an individual with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. A reminder that these groups were not sealed away from one another by absolute barriers. They met, they mixed, they recognized one another at least enough for intimacy and offspring to exist. Scholars still debate how frequent such encounters were and how these populations interacted socially. But the old image of separate human types moving through separate worlds no longer holds. For the question of everyday life, this matters because the cave becomes a meeting point between the visible and invisible. The visible evidence says people came here, made or carried tools, used fire, processed animals, and lived in relation to the valley. The invisible evidence says some of those people belonged to a population unknown until genetics revealed it. Between those two kinds of evidence lies the daily human reality people entering from the cold, bringing in meat or wood or stone, repairing equipment, resting under rock, perhaps listening to weather at the entrance, perhaps watching animals below. The cave does not give us their full story, but it gives us a location where the vanished becomes almost touchable. And that is why Denisova Cave matters so much to a calm history of ordinary ancient days. It teaches that the daily life of early humans is not always preserved in dramatic scenes. More often, It survives as residue. It is held in ash, broken flakes, worn teeth, bone dust, and genetic fragments. A day passes, and almost everything about it disappears. Another day passes, and the same is true. But repeat that across generations, across cold seasons and warm ones, across the movement of animals and the return of groups to familiar shelter, and the earth begins to hold a pattern. Much later, that pattern becomes evidence. Much later, evidence becomes a name. Denisovan, a modern word for people who never called themselves that. People who woke, moved, carried, repaired, watched, and vanished, leaving a cave to speak for them in a language no one knew how to read until very recently. Beyond the mouth of the cave, the world is not empty wilderness. It is a living map, though no line is drawn on skin, bark, bone, or stone. It is held in memory and repeated movement, in the way a valley bends toward water, in the way a herd leaves churned ground near a crossing, in the way certain slopes keep snow longer than others. To people moving through Ice Age Asia, landscape is not scenery, it is instruction. Every ridge, riverbank, thicket, hollow. An open stretch of grass can offer something or demand a price. A modern observer might see a vast land without roads. The people within it see routes, warnings, shelters, materials, and seasonal promises. The Altai world around Denisova Cave is a place of edges. Mountains rise into cold air, valleys collect movement, forests break into open steppe, and rivers cut paths through stone and sediment. During the Pleistocene, climate does not hold still. Warmer intervals open forests and soften ranges. Colder phases spread grasslands, expose distances, and push animals into new patterns. The environment changes not only over thousands of years, but across seasons, weeks, and even a single day. Morning frost can become afternoon mud. A river that is passable in 1 month can become dangerous in another. A hillside rich with plants in summer can be a bare slope under winter wind. For early humans, adaptation is not a grand theory. It is the habit of noticing before hunger becomes urgent. A day outside the cave begins with this attention. The group does not step into a neutral world, they step into weather. If wind comes from high ground, it changes how far people may travel and how quickly heat leaves the body. If clouds hang low, a long trip may become unwise. If the air is clear and hard, visibility improves, but cold bites deeper into fingers and exposed skin. Humans in such conditions live by judgment. Their bodies are capable, but not invincible. Even strong legs must obey distance, temperature, and the need to return with enough energy left to be useful. Movement is one of the great facts of early human life. It is easy to imagine ancient people fixed inside caves, but caves are only pauses. Most of life happens between places. People follow game, search for plants, collect wood, locate stone, visit water, avoid danger, and remember where previous journeys succeeded or failed. Some tasks can be done nearby, but others require walking for hours over uneven ground, through brush, along river margins, or across open land where the body is visible from a distance. A person who knows the landscape well does not merely know where things are, they know when those things matter. This is where the phrase hunter-gatherer can become too small. It is accurate in a broad sense, but it can flatten the intelligence of a day. Gathering is not simply picking whatever is nearby. It requires knowing which plants are edible, which parts are useful, when they appear, how they change, and how they should be processed. Hunting is not simply chasing animals. It requires reading tracks, understanding wind direction, recognizing weakness, predicting movement, and cooperating without wasting effort. Scavenging, too, is not a lesser act of desperation. In many ancient landscapes, it could require courage, timing, and sharp awareness of other predators. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests that early humans lived by a flexible mix of strategies rather than one heroic method repeated forever. Asia makes this flexibility especially important. The possible Denisovan world is enormous, reaching far beyond the Altai if genetic signals in living populations are any guide. Across that wider range, environments vary dramatically. There are cold uplands, river valleys, forests, grasslands, monsoon regions, island worlds, and high plateaus where breath itself becomes labour. No single landscape can stand for all Denisovan life. A group in Siberia does not face the same daily conditions as a group farther east or south. Yet across these differences, the central rhythm is similar. Humans must read the local world closely enough to keep moving through it. In the colder northern and upland zones, warmth shapes the day. Fuel is not optional. Wood, brush, bone, and anything that can hold flame become part of the mental inventory of the land. The search for fuel may not look dramatic, but it is one of the tasks that makes the rest of life possible. Fire cooks food, prepares materials, warms bodies, extends social time into darkness, and discourages some animals from coming too close. A beautiful valley without fuel may be less useful than a rougher place that offers shelter and burnable material. Ancient people do not choose places only for views. They choose them because bodies must endure the night. Water is just as decisive. Rivers are pathways, drinking places, hunting corridors and barriers. They gather animals and plants, but they also shape risk. In cold seasons, ice may create crossings or conceal danger. In warmer seasons, meltwater and storms can change banks and currents. A river valley can lead people through a mountain region, but it can also trap cold air, channel wind, and attract predators. Every useful feature has another face. The same place that provides food may also require vigilance. The open steppe offers a different kind of information. Visibility stretches farther. Herd animals can be seen at a distance, and so can humans. There is less cover, more exposure, and perhaps a stronger dependence on planning. Forest edges, by contrast, create complexity plants, small animals, wood, shade, ambush, concealment, and confusion. A skilled human day may involve moving between these zones, using each for what it offers. The edge between forest and open ground can be especially valuable because different resources meet there. Ecologists might call it an ecotone. Ancient people would not need the word, they would know the place. Season after season, such knowledge becomes social memory. One person may remember where a toolstone source lies beyond a ridge. Another may know which valley holds berries for only a brief time. Another may recognize the old trail of large animals after snowmelt. Children, when present in the group, are not imagined here as abandoned or exposed. They are part of a protective social world where learning happens close to others, through watching, carrying, listening, and gradually understanding the patterns around them. The daily landscape teaches, but it teaches through people. For Denisovans, much of this remains inference. We cannot stand at the cave entrance and watch their roots unfold. We cannot mark with certainty every plant they used or every path they preferred. Scholars still debate the scale of their range, the details of their technology in different regions, and how their lives varied across climates. But no human population survives deep time without detailed environmental knowledge. The fact that Denisovan ancestry appears in people adapted to harsh places hints at a lineage deeply familiar with difficult landscapes. As the day advances, the cave grows smaller behind them. The land ahead is not a blank expanse. It is memory underfoot. There may be no map in the modern sense, no border, no road sign, no written direction. But the world is marked everywhere by use. A remembered bend in the river, the smell of wet stone, the flight of birds from a hidden hollow, the old place where flint was found, the slope where snow softens. First, these are coordinates. Early humans do not move through wilderness as strangers. They move through a demanding home, one that can be generous, indifferent, and dangerous in the same day. To live here is to read constantly, and to read well enough that morning becomes afternoon, afternoon becomes evening, and the group finds its way back toward fire. The people moving through that demanding Ice Age home leave behind a strange imbalance. Their world is large, their genetic legacy wide, their importance unmistakable, and yet their bodies remain almost absent. For Neanderthals, there are skulls, limbs, burial contexts, injuries, faces reconstructed with cautious imagination, enough bone to make the species feel physically near. For Homo sapiens, the record grows richer still as time moves forward, but the Denisovans stand in a fog. They are known first not by a face looking back from a skull, but by a molecular signature recovered from fragments so small that the imagination keeps searching for more than the evidence can safely give. A tooth, a bit of finger bone, a jaw from the Tibetan plateau linked to the Denisovan world through ancient proteins. A few other remains still debated, still studied, still waiting for certainty. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness shapes every honest attempt to picture them. This is one of the most unusual reversals in the history of human origins. Usually, the story begins with bones. A fossil is found, compared, measured, classified, argued over, placed somewhere in the widening family tree. With Denisovans, the story begins with DNA. Their identity is not announced by the slope of a forehead or the width of a pelvis, but by sequences of ancient genetic material that reveal a population related to Neanderthals, distinct from modern humans, and yet close enough to both that their history becomes entangled with ours. They are not a mythic missing link. They are not a vanished race in the old, misleading sense. They are a sister human lineage, part of the broader human family, real enough to leave descendants in the genomes of living people, but physically elusive enough to remind us how much of the past can vanish before science learns how to see it. So what did a Denisovan look like when rising from sleep, stepping into cold air, or carrying a tool across the valley? Here the careful answer is that no one knows with confidence. Some genetic studies have attempted to infer traits, and some anatomical clues suggest robust bodies suited to demanding environments. But these are not the same as seeing a complete skeleton. It is tempting to borrow the Neanderthal image: a powerful build, broad chest, strong limbs, a face shaped by cold and deep time. Yet Denisovans were not simply Eastern Neanderthals wearing another name. Their lineage had its own history, its own population structure, and likely its own range of variation. The safest image is not a single face, but a spectrum of possible human forms, close enough to us to be kin, different enough to be recognized genetically as something else. One clue comes from teeth. Denisovan molars from Denisova Cave are unusually large compared with many modern human teeth, and this detail has drawn attention because teeth often preserve where other bones disappear. Teeth are small monuments of growth, diet, ancestry, and wear. They can survive burial, cold, and time better than much of the skeleton. A large tooth does not give a complete body, but it hints at a robust ancient population with traits not easily folded into the modern human pattern. Still, scholars debate how far such traits can be generalized. A few teeth cannot stand for every Denisovan across Asia, just as a few modern people could not represent the entire shape of humanity today. The jaw from Baishia Karst Cave on the Tibetan plateau adds another layer. It is not a full face, but it is a powerful fossil, found far from the Altai and associated with a high-altitude environment that would challenge many humans even now. Its connection to Denisovans comes not from preserved DNA in the original early study, but from protein evidence and later sedimentary genetic work in the cave environment, making it part of the broader Denisovan puzzle. The jaw suggests that at least some Denisovan-related people could live in or near extreme highland settings, long before modern infrastructure made such places easier to endure. It also suggests a body adapted not only by culture, but by biology and long familiarity with difficult terrain. Yet again, no single explanation fully accounts for their full appearance, because one mandible from one region cannot define an entire population spread across deep time and vast geography. The body of a Denisovan, whatever its exact shape, must be understood as a working body. This matters because ancient human anatomy is sometimes imagined like a museum label, static and isolated. But every bone was once involved in motion. Feet pressed uneven ground, knees bent on slopes, hands gripped stone, wood, hide, and bone. Shoulders carried weight, teeth bit, tore, held, cracked, and wore down through use. A face was not a diagram of ancestry. It was exposed to wind, smoke, heat, cold, hunger, fatigue, and social life. A hand was not a fossil category. It was a tool for making other tools, for holding embers away from skin, for lifting a child safely, for scraping a hide, for feeling the edge of a flake and deciding whether it was still sharp enough. Because Denisovan bodies are so poorly preserved, scientists lean heavily on comparison. Neanderthals can offer one set of clues because they are close relatives. Early modern humans offer another because they overlap in time and sometimes in place. Genetics adds still another, showing relationships, population splits, interbreeding, and inherited adaptations. But comparison has limits. It can illuminate the outline and still leave the interior dark. What survives in the record suggests that Denisovans were not marginal curiosities, but a major human lineage in Asia. What does not survive is the fullness of their posture, gesture, expression, and everyday presence. Their identity is also more complicated than a simple species label might suggest. Scientists often call them Denisovans, because the first evidence came from Denisova Cave, but that name may cover a wide and varied set of populations. Genetic signals in modern humans suggest that there may have been different Denisovan-related groups, perhaps separated by geography and time, not one uniform people moving as a single tribe across the continent. Some inherited DNA in present-day populations appears to come from deeply diverged Denisovan lineages, implying a human world with structure, distance, and repeated contact. In other words, Denisovan may be less like the name of a single village and more like a modern label placed over a wide family of vanished relatives. For daily life, this matters because a person's identity is never only biological. Denisovans would have known themselves through group, place, memory, kinship, movement, and habit, not through a future scientific category. They did not wake as representatives of a lineage. They woke as members of a small social world, among familiar bodies, voices, smells, tusks, and roots. Their sense of us may have been local and immediate, the people who share the fire, the ones who know this valley, the ones whose movements are recognized at a distance, the ones whose hands know the same way to strike stone or prepare a skin. The genetic category that fascinates us would have meant nothing to them, and yet that category is the only reason we can speak of them at all. DNA gives them back to history, but it gives them back in a particular way as relatives first, as bodies second, as daily lives last. It tells us they were here, that they were distinct, that they met and mixed with other humans, that they contributed to living populations, and that their story stretched far beyond a single cave. It does not tell us whether their hair was worn loose or bound, how they marked belonging, whether they painted skin, how they comforted one another in long cold weather, or what names they gave to ridges and rivers. Those things fall into silence. So the Denisovan body remains partly imagined at the edge of the fire, not invented freely, not filled with fantasy, but approached through restraint. A strong jaw, perhaps, large teeth in some individuals, hands capable of skilled tool use, bodies adapted by experience and, in some places, by inherited traits suited to difficult environments, faces unknown, voices unknown, clothing likely, but usually vanished, ornaments possible in some contexts, but attribution debated. The mystery is not that they were primitive shadows. The mystery is that they were fully alive, moving through real mornings and real weather, while leaving us so little of their visible selves. They were not less human because we cannot see them clearly. They are harder to see because time has taken almost everything except the deepest signature of kinship, the code inside bone, tooth, earth, and in faint surviving traces, us. By the time the light reaches the valley floor, the ancient day has become a series of small decisions. Nothing about it resembles a modern schedule, yet it is not aimless. The people around the shelter are not waiting for life to happen to them. They are already working, though working is almost too narrow a word. They are maintaining the conditions that allow another day to continue. They are keeping edges sharp, food usable, bodies warm, knowledge active, and social bonds steady. In a Denisovan world, as in the world of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, survival does not depend only on rare moments of danger or brilliance, it depends on repetition. A fire must be tended many times. A tool must be repaired before it fails. A hide must be softened before cold makes it stiff. A route must be remembered before hunger forces a risky search. Ordinary life is not background. It is the structure holding everything else together. Near the hearth, the first work is often quiet enough to disappear from imagination. Someone shifts ash and studies the fuel. If the group has dry wood or brush nearby, the morning is easier. If fuel is scarce, the day begins with a problem. Fire consumes the landscape in small pieces, and every flame has to be paid for by gathering, carrying, and storing burnable material. That task may seem humble, but in a cold environment it is as important as any hunt. Without fire, meat is harder to cook, bones harder to process, hides harder to treat, and long dark hours harder to endure. A hearth is not just a place, it is a project that never ends. Around it, tools gather like an extension of the body. There may be stone flakes with bright cutting edges, heavier hammer stones, bone fragments, wooden shafts, scraping implements, and objects whose purpose is no longer obvious to us because their softer parts have vanished. The archaeological record preserves stone best, which can trick the mind into imagining a Stone Age made mostly of stone. But much of the daily world would have been organic wood, bark, grass, sinew, hide, feathers, fibres, resin, fat, and cordage. These things rot, burn, dissolve, or are eaten by time. What survives in the record suggests only the hard skeleton of a much richer technology. A person sitting near the cave mouth may be repairing a wooden point, binding a tool with sinew, smoothing a handle, or checking a container made from materials that will leave no trace at all. Food, too, demands work long after it is found. Meat must be cut, scraped, pounded, roasted, dried, shared, or stored briefly if conditions allow. Bones must be cracked in the right way to reach marrow. Fat is valuable, sometimes more valuable than lean meat, because cold climates and active bodies burn energy quickly. Plant foods, when available, are not always eaten straight from the ground. Some need peeling, grinding, soaking, roasting, or careful selection. Even the leftovers matter. A bone can become a tool. A hide can become covering. Tendons can become bindings. Ash can help in processing. Nothing useful is casually wasted when every object has cost effort to obtain. This is one of the most surprising lessons for modern people asking what early humans did all day. They did not simply hunt, eat, and sleep. They processed, they sorted, they carried, they cleaned, they repaired, they waited for the right moment. They watched the weather. They made choices about energy. Some days may have included long movement across difficult ground. Other days may have been dominated by tasks close to camp tool maintenance, food preparation, care of the hearth, treatment of skins, planning routes, and the kind of social attention that leaves almost no archaeological mark. The evidence remains incomplete, but hunter-gatherer life in many environments is not a constant frantic chase. It is a shifting rhythm of intense effort, careful rest, skillful maintenance, and opportunistic movement. The body knows this rhythm. Hands become marked by repeated pressure. Fingertips learn the difference between an edge that cuts well and one that will slip. Shoulders know the weight of carried wood or meat. Feet remember stones, slopes, mud, frozen ground, and the safest way down from a ridge. Ancient humans are not specialized workers in the modern sense, but they are full of expertise. Knowledge lives in muscle as much as memory. A person can learn how to strike a stone core not by reading instruction, but by watching angle, force, sound, and failure over many attempts. Teaching may not require formal lessons. It can happen through proximity, repetition, correction, and shared attention. If children are present in such a group, their place in the day is protective and social rather than separate. They remain close to familiar adults, absorbing patterns of movement, tool use, plant knowledge, and caution through ordinary contact. Their learning is part of the group's continuity, not a dramatic ordeal. In deep prehistory, as today, human young depend on care for a long time, and that long dependence may be one of humanity's great evolutionary pressures. It encourages cooperation, patience, food sharing, and social memory. Scholars still debate the exact forms of childhood, teaching, and family organization among Denisovans, because the evidence is thin, but it is difficult to imagine any successful human group without some durable system of care. For adults, the day may divide itself not by rank or occupation, but by ability, knowledge, immediate need, and circumstance. Some people may be better at reading animal movement. Some may be especially skilled at stoneworking, Some may remember distant places. Some may carry social knowledge who is related to whom, where conflict should be softened, when a move is wise, which old choice led to trouble. These capacities would not appear in fossils. Yet they shape survival as surely as strong limbs do. A small human group is not just a collection of bodies, it is a web of remembered skills. There is also time that modern imagination might call leisure, though the word does not quite fit. When a task is finished, people may sit. They may watch the fire, touch up tools, rest sore legs, groom, listen, gesture, vocalize, or simply do nothing visible for a while. Rest is not failure in a world governed by energy, it is strategy. A person who wastes strength at the wrong time may pay for it later. The ancient day likely contains pauses, waiting, and long stretches of observation. In those pauses, minds still work. A valley is watched. The behavior of birds is noticed. A sound beyond the shelter is weighed and identified. The fire's smoke tells something about air movement. A familiar person's mood is understood without needing many words. This quiet social life may be one of the hardest things to recover. Stone tools can be measured, bones can be dated, DNA can be sequenced, but companionship rarely fossilizes. The ordinary comfort of sitting near others, the tension of deciding whether to move camp, the relief of returning with food, the annoyance of smoke in the eyes, the patience of scraping a hide for longer than anyone wants to, the satisfaction of a tool edge made clean again. These are human experiences, but they are nearly invisible after tens of thousands of years. No single explanation fully accounts for how Denisovan groups organize their daily tasks, yet the basic pattern is hard to avoid. They had to cooperate because the environment demanded more than any one body could provide alone. As the sun rises higher, the shelter becomes a center of motion. People leave and return. Objects change places. Raw material becomes tool. Food becomes energy. Firewood becomes heat. Memory becomes decision. The day does not announce itself as historic. It has no monument inside it. It is made of ash, breath, effort, and habit, and yet repeated across generations. These quiet mornings are the true substance of the ancient human story, long before cities, wages, fields, and written laws. Human life is already organized around labor, care, skill, patience, and attention. The mystery is not that early humans had nothing to do. The mystery is how much they did, how much they knew, and how little of that enormous daily intelligence survived for us to see. Farther from the shelter, the day widens into paths of food, not roads, not trails in the modern sense, but remembered lines of possibility across a living landscape. The people who move out from the hearth do not go in search of a single meal, as though the world were a storehouse waiting to be opened. They move through a field of signs, a broken branch, a hoofprint softened by thaw, a scatter of seeds beneath grass, a place where animals have rubbed against bark. A hollow where water gathers after frost begins to lift each detail can matter. Early humans live by noticing small changes before those changes become obvious. Hunger is not solved only by strength, it is solved by attention. Food in the Ice Age world is never just food. It is distance, risk, timing, memory, and processing. A carcass far away may offer meat, but cost too much energy to reach and carry. A cluster of edible plants nearby may be valuable for a brief season and useless a few weeks later. A herd visible on open ground may be too alert, too fast, or moving with wind in its favour. A frozen landscape may preserve meat better, but hide plants and reduce easy fuel. Nothing stands alone. Every food choice is tied to weather, group size, available tools, health, and the need to return safely. This is why the ancient day cannot be reduced to a simple picture of men hunting and others waiting. The reality is more flexible, more variable, and more intelligent than that. For Denisovans, the details remain partly hidden, because their direct archaeological record is thin and spread unevenly across regions. But they belong to a wider human world in which diet had to be adaptable. In northern and upland environments, large animals could provide crucial calories, especially fat. In valleys and forest edges, plant foods, small animals, eggs, fish, roots, nuts, berries, and seasonal greens may have contributed depending on place and time. Scholars still debate exactly how much different human groups relied on meat compared with plant foods in particular regions, because preservation often favours animal bone over fragile plant remains. What survives in the record can make ancient diets look more meat-heavy than they always were. The missing plant world is one of archaeology's quiet absences. A foraging path might begin with a goal and change before midday. People may set out intending to check an animal crossing, then notice fresh sign in another direction. They may gather dry wood along the way because a useful load of fuel is never wasted. They may stop at a known stone source to test a nodule or collect a few flakes. They may dig where roots are expected, scan for bird movement, or listen for the alarm calls of animals that have seen something humans have not. The day is layered. One journey can serve several needs at once. A person does not walk only to hunt, only to gather, or only to explore. They move through a world where every return should ideally bring back more than one kind of value. Hunting, when it happens, is not always the dramatic sprint imagined in modern scenes. Often it may involve patience, tracking, positioning, cooperation, and waiting for circumstances to favour the humans. Large animals are dangerous, and injury can threaten not just one person, but the whole group's ability to function. A badly timed attack wastes energy and may damage precious tools. Success depends on knowing animal behaviour when a herd approaches water, how wind carries scent, where terrain slows movement, which individuals lag behind, how snow or mud changes footing. Early humans are predators, but they are also careful calculators of risk. No single explanation fully accounts for every hunting strategy used across Denisovan environments. Yet it is clear that large-brained humans did not survive by brute force alone. Scavenging may also have played a role, though the word often carries the wrong mood. In a world shared with carnivores, finding an animal already dead is not automatically safe or simple. It may require reading the freshness of tracks, watching for predators, judging whether enough meat or marrow remains, and moving quickly with tools ready. A bone left by another hunter can still hold fat-rich marrow. A carcass partly frozen can become a temporary store if the cold is deep enough. But such opportunities demand nerve and judgment. The line between hunter, scavenger, and forager is not always clean in the ancient record, and early humans likely crossed it often. Once food is brought back, fire changes everything. Cooking softens tissue, makes some foods easier to chew, can reduce certain hazards, and releases energy more efficiently from many resources. Around fire, the day's raw effort becomes something shareable. Meat roasts, bones crack, fat melts, tough plant parts soften. Smoke dries and flavours what it touches, though smoke also stings eyes and clings to hair, hides, and cave walls. Fire turns a cold shelter into a social centre, but it also requires discipline. Someone must manage flame, fuel, distance, and timing. Food burns if ignored. Embers die if neglected. Sparks can damage bedding or hides. Even warmth has to be handled with skill. The relationship between food and fire may have shaped the ancient day more deeply than any single tool. A group with reliable fire can extend activity after sunset. They can sit together when darkness would otherwise scatter attention into danger. They can process materials, share food more safely, and create a zone where bodies recover. Yet fire also anchors people temporarily. If they have fuel and food, staying near the hearth makes sense. If the surrounding area is depleted, movement becomes necessary again. The hearth is both centre and question: can the landscape continue to support this place? Or must the group follow the resources elsewhere? There are quieter food tasks too, the ones rarely celebrated because they resemble chores more than adventure. Scraping meat from bone, separating usable hide from flesh, sorting pieces by what should be eaten first, carrying water, cleaning tools before residue hardens, drying or smoking strips if conditions allow, crushing, pounding, or grinding plant material with stones, selecting which bones are worth breaking and which are better saved for other uses. Such work can take hours. It may be done while others rest, talk, watch, or prepare for another trip. Daily life is not a sequence of dramatic events. It is the patient transformation of raw landscape into usable energy. One lesser-known detail is that ancient humans may have valued fat so intensely that lean meat alone could be inadequate in cold, demanding environments. Protein fills the stomach, but fat carries dense energy. Marrow, brain tissue, fatty organs, and grease from bones may have mattered enormously. Archaeologists sometimes find evidence of bones smashed in ways consistent with marrow extraction or grease processing, though interpretations vary by site. This kind of work is messy, repetitive, and practical. It does not fit the romantic image of a spear raised against the horizon, but it may have meant more to survival than the spear itself. As afternoon leans toward evening, the foraging paths begin to turn back. What returns to the shelter is not only food, it is news, the movement of animals, the condition of ice, the presence of tracks, the failure of one route and promise of another. A stone source remembered for later, a patch of plants not yet ready, a danger avoided. Information is carried like meat, sometimes even more valuable because it shapes tomorrow. Around the fire, the day's knowledge becomes part of the group's shared world. The evidence remains incomplete, and the Denisovan voice is lost. But the pattern is deeply human. Go out, read the land, bring something back, turn it into life, and remember where the next day might begin. In the ancient day, tools are not separate from the body for very long. They ride in the hand, lie near the hearth, sit tucked into hides or carried in simple containers, wait beside bones, and move with the group across the landscape. A modern person might think of a tool as an object with a clear name and a single purpose. A knife cuts, a hammer strikes, a needle sews. But in the deep human past, many tools are more fluid than that. A sharp flake can slice meat, trim wood, scrape hide, cut plant fibre, or be abandoned after a few minutes if its edge fails. A heavy stone can break bone, shape another stone, crack nuts, or drive force into a surface that needs to split. A piece of bone can become a point, a wedge, a smooth working edge, or simply a useful object held for one task and never formalized into anything more. The tool world of early humans is practical, changing, and deeply intimate. A Denisova Cave and sites like it. Stone is the great survivor. It remains after wood rots, hides dissolve, cords vanish, and the soft architecture of daily life disappears. This creates a powerful illusion. Because archaeologists find so much stone, it can seem as though early human life was dominated by stone alone. In reality, stone may have been the durable trace of a much broader technology. The vanished world would have included wooden shafts, digging sticks, bark containers, fibre ties, hide wrappings, bedding, handles, resins, cords, and perhaps complex composite tools made from several materials joined together. The evidence remains incomplete because the most common things in life are often the least likely to survive. A person may spend hours repairing a wooden implement, but tens of thousands of years later, the stone flake used in the repair is all that remains. Making a stone tool begins long before the first strike. It begins with knowing where the right raw material can be found. Not every stone breaks well. Some crumble, some shatter unpredictably, some are too coarse to hold an edge. Good toolstone can become part of a group's mental map, remembered across seasons and distances. A person who collects stone is not simply picking up rocks. They are judging texture, fracture, weight, size, and future usefulness. They may carry a promising piece back to shelter, or strike off flakes where the stone is found to reduce weight before transport. Even this choice is practical intelligence. Carry too much, and energy is wasted. Carry too little, and the group may lack what it needs later. The act of shaping stone is both simple and difficult. A blow lands, and physics does the rest. But only if the angle, force, and platform are right. A skilled knapper sees potential in a core before the flake exists. They understand where force will travel, how the stone will ripple, where an edge might form, and when a mistake will ruin the piece. The sharpness that emerges can be astonishing. Fresh stone flakes can cut with a delicacy that surprises anyone who imagines ancient tools as crude. Yet the skill is not only in making a sharp edge, it is in making the right edge for the right task, and in knowing when a disposable flake is enough and when a more carefully shaped tool is worth the time. This distinction matters for understanding daily life. Early humans were not always trying to create impressive objects. Much of their technology may have been quick, efficient, and temporary. A flake struck for a particular job might be used and left behind within minutes. Another tool might be retouched repeatedly until its shape changed through use. Archaeologists can read some of these histories in wear patterns, breakage, edge damage, and the way flakes scatter across a site. A concentration of stone debris may mark a place where tools were made or repaired. Cut marks on bones may show where flesh was removed. Impact scars may suggest hunting equipment, but interpretation requires care. Scholars still debate the meaning of many tool assemblages, especially when different human groups occupied the same cave over long periods. A layer may hold evidence, but a layer is also a puzzle of time, disturbance, and return. At Denisova Cave, that puzzle is especially complex because multiple human populations use the site across deep time. A tool found in a particular layer does not automatically reveal the hand that made it unless dating, context, associated remains, and sometimes genetic evidence align. Denisovans, Neanderthals, and later Homo sapiens all belong to the wider story of the cave. This makes attribution difficult. Some objects may belong confidently to one period, while others remain uncertain. The cave teaches humility. A beautiful artifact can tempt the imagination, but the responsible question is always who made it, when, in what context, and how securely do we know? No single explanation fully accounts for every object recovered from such a layered place. Still, the tools reveal a world of planning. Even a simple flake implies a chain of actions: find stone, strike it, use it, maintain it, discard it. More complex tools imply longer chains: prepare a core, shape a point, attach it to a handle, bind it with sinew or fibre, perhaps use resin, repair it after damage, carry it across distance. Composite technology is especially important because it joins materials with different properties. Stone cuts, wood extends reach, sinew binds, resin grips. Hide protects. A finished tool may be less a single object than a small cooperation between parts of the landscape. The person holding it carries a valley, a tree, an animal, and a stone source in one hand. Tools also suggest teaching. Not teaching in a classroom, not instruction written on a wall, but patient transmission through watching and doing. A young learner in a protective group setting might sit near an experienced napper, seeing how stone is held, how the wrist turns, how failed flakes are handled, how dangerous sharp edges are avoided. The sound of a good strike differs from a poor one. The shape of a prepared platform matters. The lesson is not abstract, it is embodied over time. Skill passes through imitation, correction, and shared attention. This kind of learning leaves no direct fossil, but it is written indirectly in the consistency of tool traditions and the complexity of tasks that require more than instinct. There is another quiet truth in ancient tools: they show care for the future. A group that carries stone from one place to another is preparing for needs that have not yet arrived. A person who resharpens a scraper before the next hide is ready is thinking ahead. A hunter who repairs a point before following tracks is reducing risk before risk becomes visible. Even discarded tools can show economy. Because some are used almost to exhaustion while others are abandoned quickly where stone is abundant. Technology is not only evidence of intelligence, it is evidence of time management, landscape knowledge, and expectation. Bone tools and worked organic materials widen that picture, though they survive less often. Bone can be shaped, polished, split, pointed, and used in ways that stone cannot. Antler and ivory, where available, offer toughness and flexibility. Wood, almost always missing, may have been among the most important materials of all. A sharpened wooden spear, a digging stick hardened in fire, a handle smoothed by use, a frame for carrying, a simple windbreak. A bedding platform, these could shape daily life profoundly and leave little behind. What survives in the record suggests only glimpses of such organic skill. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is often evidence that time is selective. As evening returns, tools gather back around the hearth. Some are cleaned, some are repaired, some are judged no longer worth carrying. A broken edge may still serve another purpose. A small flake may be saved because tomorrow's task is unknown. In this way, ancient technology becomes part of the rhythm of the day: make, use, mend, carry, discard, remember. The Denisovans remain difficult to see, but their world cannot have functioned without this constant conversation between hand and material. A tool is more than a relic. It is a frozen gesture. It is a decision hardened into stone. It is the shape of a moment when an ancient person looked at the world, understood a problem, and made the landscape answer. The people around the fire are not only toolmakers, walkers, foragers, or hunters. They are a social species, and that fact may matter more than any single blade of stone. A Denisovan group, like other human groups of the Ice Age, does not survive because every individual is strong enough to face the world alone. No human is. The cold is too persistent, injuries too costly, food too uneven, childhood too long, memory too valuable, and landscape too complicated for solitary life to be the normal answer. The ancient day is therefore not only a search for calories, it is a web of relationships constantly being maintained, repaired, tested, and renewed. Around the hearth, social life is as real as firewood. It has to be tended, or the group itself begins to weaken. This is one of the quiet truths hidden beneath the dramatic image of prehistory. A person can have a sharp tool and still fail without others. Someone must know where the group went last season. Someone must notice when a familiar path is no longer safe. Someone must share food when luck is uneven, because luck is always uneven. Someone must help carry knowledge across generations. Someone must calm tension before it divides a small group that cannot afford division. In such a world, cooperation is not moral decoration. It is infrastructure. It is the invisible shelter inside the visible one. The evidence for Denisovan social life is indirect, because behavior rarely fossilizes. No preserved conversation tells us how decisions were made. No surviving song reveals how people remembered the dead, welcomed a return, or marked the first snow. But what survives in the record suggests that these ancient humans lived in groups, used tools, moved through difficult terrain, and endured climates that demanded cooperation. Genetics adds another layer, showing that Denisovans were not isolated ghosts but part of a larger human landscape of kinship, contact, and interbreeding. The exact size and structure of their groups remain uncertain, and scholars still debate how their social organization compared with Neanderthals or early Homo sapiens. But the broad human pattern is clear. Survival depends on relationships. At the center of those relationships is care. Care can be simple and practical, sharing warmth, dividing food, watching while others sleep, helping process a hide, carrying fuel, warning of danger, or teaching someone how to handle a sharp edge without wasting stone or blood. It can also be long-term. Humans are unusual animals because young people require extended support, and older or injured individuals may continue to matter through knowledge even when they cannot always contribute through strength. In many human societies, memory itself is a resource. A person who remembers distant water, old animal patterns, or the signs of a hard winter can be as valuable as a fast runner. The archaeological record cannot easily show such a person sitting by the fire, but the logic of human survival strongly allows for them. When children are present, they exist within this protective social world. They learn by being near others, by watching hands, following movement, hearing repeated sounds, noticing which plants are handled and which are avoided, seeing how tools are carried, and understanding that the world is full of rules long before anyone can explain them fully. Their role in the story should remain gentle and careful, because deep prehistory does not need to be imagined through scenes of danger to be meaningful. It is enough to recognize that human young are learners, and that a group's future depends on keeping learning close to care. A child watching a stone flake being struck is seeing more than a task. They are seeing patience, angle, timing, and restraint. They are watching culture pass from one body to another. That passage of culture may have happened in ways both obvious and subtle. Some knowledge can be shown directly where to strike stone, how to scrape a hide, how to carry a coal, how to avoid smoke, how to recognize a useful track. Other knowledge is absorbed through rhythm, when the group rises, when it rests, how it responds to weather, who leads a movement, who hesitates at a sound, how food is shared, which places are treated with caution, These patterns teach without announcing themselves. Daily life is full of instruction hidden inside repetition. One lesser-known detail about small-scale human societies is that conversation, grooming, shared meals, and apparently quiet time can be socially productive. Resting near a fire is not necessarily empty time. It may be when alliances are softened, tensions are released, plans are formed, and memory is refreshed. For Denisovans, language remains unknown. We cannot say what their speech sounded like, how complex it was, or how much gesture carried alongside voice. But given their close relationship to other humans and their capacity for long-term survival in difficult environments, it is reasonable to imagine rich communication, even if the details are lost. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the origins or forms of language among these groups. But daily cooperation would have required ways to share attention, intention, warning, and memory. Social bonds also shape movement. A group does not simply scatter into the landscape like sparks. People move in relation to one another. Some remain close to shelter, some travel farther, some return earlier, some carry heavier loads, some watch, some process, some repair. These divisions are not necessarily rigid. They may change with age, health, season, weather, and immediate need. The modern desire to assign fixed jobs to ancient people can be misleading. In a small group, flexibility is strength. A good toolmaker may gather plants. A skilled tracker may also carry fuel. A person who knows the weather may influence whether anyone leaves at all. The ancient day is organized less by titles than by competence and circumstance. There is intimacy in such a life, but not simplicity. Small groups can be supportive, but they can also be tense. Food shortages, fatigue, jealousy, injury, disagreement over movement, or failed hunts may strain relationships. Yet the cost of rupture can be high. If a group divides at the wrong time, everyone becomes more vulnerable. Social intelligence therefore matters. The ability to read another person's mood, to avoid needless conflict, to share at the right moment, to remember obligations. To trust and be trusted, these are not soft skills in the Ice Age. They are survival tools, as necessary in their way as stone edges and fire. The Denisovan genetic story hints at another level of social contact meetings beyond the immediate group. The famous individual from Denisova Cave with a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father proves that at least some encounters between closely related human groups were intimate enough to produce children. That single life opens a vast field of questions. Did such contacts happen during seasonal overlap at shared shelters, along migration routes? Through small groups meeting at resource-rich places, scholars still debate the frequency and meaning of these encounters, but the evidence shows that ancient human boundaries were permeable. The Ice Age was not filled with sealed species passing in silence. At times, humans recognized one another, approached, and became family. Around evening, when bodies return to the fire, the social world tightens again. Food is divided, tools are placed within reach, news from outside is shared in whatever forms language, gesture, expression, and habit allow. Someone's success becomes the group's relief. Someone's mistake becomes tomorrow's caution. Smoke rises. The cave wall holds warmth for a little while. The valley outside darkens into uncertainty, but inside the shelter, human presence gathers against it. This is what early humans do every day, not only hunt and gather, not only make tools, not only endure cold, but live inside a network of care and memory. Denisovans remain difficult to see in bone, but in this one respect they are not distant at all. They belonged to the oldest human truth: a single body is fragile, but a group that remembers together can face the dark for one more night. Beyond the circle of fire and the familiar valley, the Denisovan story begins to stretch until it almost escapes the map. A cave in the Altai gives them a name, but it does not contain them. The genetic traces they left in living people point outward, across Asia, and into regions where their bones have not yet been found or have not yet been recognized. This is one of the great surprises of their story. A people known from a few fragments in Siberia may have ranged, or at least contributed ancestry, across an immense human world of mountains, forests, coastlines, plateaus, islands, and river systems. The cave is the doorway, not the whole house. What begins as a small piece of finger bone becomes a continental mystery. Movement across such a world is not migration in the simple sense of one group deciding to travel from one end of Asia to another. It is slower, messier, and more human than that. Generations move because animals move, because climate changes, because a valley becomes less generous, because a new route opens, because groups split, because people marry or join others, because familiar places fail, because unfamiliar places begin to offer food. A map drawn afterward may show arrows sweeping across continents, but no one walks as an arrow. People move one day at a time, from water to shelter, from known ridge to known valley, from old memory to new possibility. A continent is crossed not by a single journey, but by thousands of ordinary decisions repeated until the descendants of one region are living in another. For Denisovans, the evidence remains incomplete, but the genetic signals are difficult to ignore. Some present-day populations in Oceania, parts of Southeast Asia, and other regions carry Denisovan-related ancestry, and that ancestry does not appear to have come from one simple encounter alone. It suggests a wider and more structured Denisovan world than the fossil record currently shows. Scholars still debate how many Denisovan-related populations existed, where they lived, how far they ranged, and where modern humans met them. But the old picture of Denisovans as a small Siberian curiosity is no longer enough. Their shadow falls across a much larger landscape. To imagine this movement, it helps to return to the daily scale. A group does not wake one morning and say it will reshape human ancestry across Asia. It follows the needs of the season. In spring, animals may move along river valleys or toward new grazing. In summer, uplands may become passable and plant foods more abundant. In autumn, the urgency of fat and storage may grow. In winter, shelter, fuel, and protected routes may matter more than distance. Each year lays a pattern over the land. Some routes are used again, others are abandoned. Young people learn the paths from older ones, and sometimes they push beyond them. Over many generations, the known world widens. The Ice Age itself is not one frozen condition, but a long sequence of climatic shifts. Glaciers advance and retreat. Sea levels fall and rise, deserts expand or shrink, forests move, grasslands open, rivers change course, coastlines appear where shallow seas once stood, then vanish again beneath rising water. In such a world, human ranges are never fixed for long. A route that is impossible in one period may become attractive in another. A region that supports people for centuries may later grow too dry, too cold, or too unstable. No single explanation fully accounts for Denisovan movement, because movement is never caused by only one thing: climate, food, population, contact, curiosity, and chance all leave their marks. The possible southern reach of Denisovan-related ancestry is especially intriguing. If modern people in Oceania and parts of island Southeast Asia carry significant Denisovan genetic traces, then some encounters between modern humans and Denisovan-related groups likely happened far from the Altai or involved populations already spread across southern and eastern Asia before Homo sapiens arrived there. This does not mean Denisovans as known from Siberia walked unchanged all the way to every island where their ancestry appears today. The more careful possibility is that Denisovan-related populations were diverse, widespread, and locally adapted, with some lineages living in regions whose fossils have not survived well. Tropical and subtropical environments are often harsh on ancient DNA and bone. Heat, humidity, acidic soils, and disturbance can erase bodies that cold caves might preserve. The absence of Denisovan fossils in many places may say as much about preservation as about where they lived. This is one reason the Denisovan mystery remains so uneven. In cold caves, fragments can survive. In warm forests, a whole human presence can vanish almost completely. Daily life in those warmer regions would have differed from life in the Altai. Instead of bitter winter air and steppe winds, people may have moved through dense vegetation, monsoon rhythms, river crossings, coastal shelves, and island edges. Food choices would change. Tools might rely more heavily on bamboo, wood, fibre, shell, or other materials that disappear easily. A rich culture of perishable technology could leave only a faint stone record. What survives in the record suggests only fragments, and in some regions, even the fragments are hard to connect securely to a particular human group. Movement also brings contact. When one human population expands into a landscape already used by another, the result is not always replacement in a simple violent sense, and it is not always peaceful blending either. It can be avoidance, exchange, interbreeding, competition, shared use of different zones, or contact so rare that it leaves only a genetic trace. The Denisovan relationship with modern humans seems to have included interbreeding, because some of their DNA survives today. But DNA alone cannot tell us whether those encounters were frequent or rare, friendly or tense, brief or sustained. The evidence gives the fact of mixture, not the full story of human experience around it. At the daily level, an encounter between groups may begin with signs before faces: smoke seen at a distance, footprints near water, a tool style unfamiliar in a shared landscape, a carcass already worked, a shelter recently used. Humans are observant animals, especially when other humans may be nearby. Another group can mean danger, opportunity, mates, knowledge, trade, or all of these at once. The ancient world is not crowded by modern standards, but it is not empty. People moving across it leave signals, and those signals change decisions. A group may avoid a valley for a few days, approach cautiously, or return later when the signs fade. The vastness of Asia makes Denisovan identity harder to hold in one image, in one place. They may have known cold mountain valleys, in another, high plateaus, in another, perhaps forested or southern environments. Some Denisovan-related people may have lived far apart for so long that they were genetically distinct from one another. The name we use may gather many worlds under one word. This is not unusual in human origins, but it is important. When we ask what Denisovans did every day, the answer may differ by region, season, and population. Some followed herds across open ground. Some may have moved through wooded valleys. Some may have adapted to thin air. Some may have lived near routes later travelled by Homo sapiens. The daily life was not one scene, but many. And yet the underlying rhythm remains recognizable. Movement is not chaos. It is patterned response. People follow resources, remember safe places, return to shelters, explore edges, and carry knowledge in bodies and relationships across generations. Those movements become ancestry. A small group turns from one valley into another. Their descendants meet another human population. Some children inherit genes from both. A lineage thins, shifts, blends, or disappears as a separate identity. But part of it travels onward, long after the fires go cold, long after the cave floor seals the ash, long after the names are lost. Those journeys remain written in living genomes. By evening, any single group still has to come back to the same simple problem: where to sleep, what to eat, how to keep warm, who is missing, what tomorrow may require. Continental history is made of such evenings. The Denisovans did not stride across Asia as symbols. They moved because the day asked them to move. They followed water, animals, stone, shelter, and other people. They crossed thresholds without knowing they were thresholds, and in doing so, they became one of the hidden threads in the larger human story, a people almost absent from the earth, yet spread across it in traces too small to see and too important to ignore. There are places on earth where the body learns quickly that air is not an endless gift. High above the warmer valleys, where the Tibetan plateau rises into immense distances of stone, wind, cold, and sky. Every breath has to work harder. The land appears open, but it is not easy. Sunlight can be sharp. Nights can turn bitter with sudden force. Plants grow low and stubborn. Animals move through wide spaces that seem empty until a trained eye finds them. Water, shelter, fuel. And food are scattered unevenly, and the simple act of walking uphill can become a negotiation with the lungs. To live here for a day is difficult. To live here across generations is something far more remarkable. This is where the Denisovan story becomes not only a story of vanished people, but a story of adaptation still carried in living bodies. Among some present-day Tibetan populations, a version of a gene associated with high-altitude adaptation appears to have come from Denisovan-related ancestry. The gene is often discussed because it helps people cope with low oxygen in a way that reduces some of the strain that high altitude can place on the body. The details are complex, and scholars still debate the full history of when and where the gene entered the ancestors of people living on the plateau. But the broad implication is powerful. A vanished human lineage may have contributed to the biological ability of later humans to thrive near the roof of the world. To understand the force of that, it helps to imagine daily life not as a genetic diagram, but as a morning on high ground. The sun comes up over a horizon so wide it seems almost oceanic. The cold does not simply touch the skin, it enters the joints, the fingers, the breath. A person rises and feels the thinness of the air before doing anything dramatic. Gathering fuel is harder because trees may be rare or absent. Movement must be measured because exhaustion arrives quickly. Hunting or following animals across open plateau means judging distance in a landscape where scale deceives the eye. A nearby ridge may be farther than it looks. A change in weather may erase visibility. A sheltering rock or cave can become precious because there may be no forest to hide in and no easy windbreak to build. For Denisovan-related people who lived in or near high-altitude environments, survival would have required both culture and biology. Biology alone does not keep a fire burning. Culture alone does not fully solve oxygen stress. The two work together. Bodies adapt over generations through inherited traits. Minds and groups adapt through knowledge where animals pass, where stone can be found, where water remains accessible, where shelter holds against wind, where fuel can be gathered. What seasons are possible, and which routes are too costly. No single explanation fully accounts for human success in harsh environments. It is always a braid of genes, tools, learning, cooperation, and luck. The Baishia cast cave jaw from the Tibetan plateau gives this story a physical anchor. It does not provide a complete Denisovan body, and it does not reveal a full culture, but it places Denisovan-related humans in an extreme landscape far from Denisova Cave. That matters because it widens the meaning of their daily life. They are not merely shadows in a Siberian chamber, at least some of them, or close relatives within the Denisovan world, are connected to places where the air itself becomes a challenge. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests that Denisovan-related populations were capable of living in environments that demand extraordinary resilience. High-altitude life changes the meaning of ordinary tasks. Carrying meat back to a shelter is harder when every step draws more breath. Processing hides in cold wind requires hands that can still work after numbness begins. Searching for plants means knowing brief windows of growth in a place where seasons can be severe. Fire may depend on scarce shrubs, dung, bone, or anything that can burn. If wood is rare, fuel becomes not only a resource but a daily calculation. A group cannot waste flame casually when every bit of burnable material has to be found, dried, carried, and protected from weather. Animals shape the highland day as well. Large herbivores adapted to open cold landscapes can provide meat, fat, hide, bone, and sinew. But they are not passive gifts. They move according to grazing, water, weather, and predator pressure. Following them across a plateau requires endurance and knowledge of terrain. Smaller animals, birds, eggs, plants, and seasonal resources may fill gaps, depending on region and period. The ancient diet here would not be a fixed menu. It would be an ongoing response to a demanding environment where abundance can appear briefly and vanish quickly. What survives in the record suggests resourcefulness, but many of the most important materials and foods may have left a little trace. The psychological landscape of high places is different too. Open land can make a person feel exposed. Weather can be seen arriving from far away, but that does not always mean it can be escaped. A distant storm, a shift in wind, a sudden fall in temperature, or snow moving across a pass can change a day's plan. In such conditions, memory becomes a kind of shelter. A group must know where to turn when weather closes in, which slopes hold danger, which hollows gather cold, which rocks block wind, which routes remain passable after snow. Ancient humans do not need written maps because the map is distributed across minds, stories, gestures, and repeated travel. There is a quiet irony here. The Denisovans are among the least visible human relatives in the fossil record, yet one of their clearest legacies may involve some of the most extreme visible landscapes on Earth. Their bones are scarce, but their genetic contribution may have helped modern humans live where breath is thin and the sky feels close enough to touch. Disappearance, in their case, does not mean erasure. It means transformation. A trait shaped in one human lineage can pass into another, and continue long after the original population is gone as a separate people. This does not mean that Denisovans were uniquely designed for altitude everywhere they lived. That would be too simple. Denisovan-related populations were likely diverse, and not all of them inhabited the same environments. Some may have known forests, valleys, caves, coasts, or warmer southern lands. The high plateau is one part of the wider story, not the whole of it. But it is a powerful part because it shows that human evolution was not only a matter of one species replacing another. Sometimes survival came through inheritance from people who later vanished from sight. As evening settles over high ground, the world cools with startling speed. A fire, if there is fuel enough for one, becomes the center of breath, warmth, and social life. Around it, the day's labor is felt in lungs and legs. The people there do not know that future scientists will search their descendants for clues, or that a gene moving quietly through generations will become evidence of a vanished meeting between human worlds. They know the immediate truth: the air is thin, the night is cold, and tomorrow will ask for movement again. Yet inside that ordinary struggle lies one of the great hidden continuities of human history. The Denisovans may have disappeared as a named population, but part of their adaptation still rises and falls in human breathing, high above the valleys, where every inhale carries a memory older than memory itself. The Denisovan world was never occupied by Denisovans alone. Across the long Ice Age, Asia and Western Eurasia held more than one kind of human presence, and the boundaries between them were not clean walls. Neanderthals moved through Europe and parts of Western and Central Asia. Homo sapiens expanded outward from Africa in waves and phases that are still being refined by archaeology and genetics. Denisovan-related populations occupied parts of Asia, perhaps in several distinct branches. Some close to the Altai, others far beyond it. These groups were separated by ancestry, geography, climate, and time, but not always by absolute distance. At certain moments, their worlds touched. The result was not a simple ladder of one humanity replacing another, but a braided landscape of meetings, separations, mixtures, and disappearances. Denisova Cave gives this tangled world an unforgettable human detail. From one small bone fragment, scientists identified an individual whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. This person, often described in scientific discussion as a first-generation hybrid, is more than a genetic curiosity. They are proof that two ancient human groups did not merely exist near one another in theory, at least once, and almost certainly more than once across wider time. They came close enough for family to form. The evidence remains incomplete, and one individual cannot tell us how common such relationships were. But the discovery breaks the older habit of imagining each human group as sealed inside its own invisible border. To picture what such contact meant in daily life, it is better not to imagine formal meetings between species, as though Ice Age groups arrived carrying banners of identity. They did not know the names we use. They did not think in terms of Denisovan, Neanderthal, or Homo sapiens. They knew familiar people and unfamiliar people. They recognized bodies, gestures, tools, sounds, smells, and intentions. Another group encountered near a river or cave might be strange, but not necessarily incomprehensible. They may have looked different in build, face, or movement, but they were close relatives, close enough that attraction, caution, rivalry, cooperation, avoidance, and kinship all become plausible human possibilities. The first sign of neighbours may have been indirect: smoke rising from a valley, a hearth still warm, stone flakes of a pattern not usually made by one's own group, bones broken and left near a shelter, footprints in mud, a scent carried by wind. Humans are experts in detecting other humans, especially when the landscape is shared and resources matter. A group may choose to stay away, watching from distance until the signs fade, or they may approach carefully. Because other humans can offer knowledge, mates, exchanged objects, or access to routes. No single explanation fully accounts for how these encounters unfolded. Some may have been tense, some may have been brief and ordinary, some may have changed ancestry forever without leaving any visible artifact behind. The relationship between Denisovans and Neanderthals reaches deep into time. Genetics suggests they shared a common ancestor after separating from the lineage leading to modern humans, then split from each other into related but distinct populations. Neanderthals became especially well known in Europe and Western Eurasia, adapted to cold and variable environments, leaving behind a relatively rich fossil record. Denisovans, by contrast, are physically elusive but genetically powerful. Their traces spread across Asia and into present-day populations beyond it. The two lineages were close enough to interbreed, yet distinct enough for their DNA to tell separate stories. They were kin who had spent long ages apart. That long separation matters. When populations live apart across thousands of generations, they gather differences. Bodies adapt to local environments. Tool traditions diverge. Social habits may shift. Sounds, gestures, and ways of marking belonging may change. If Denisovans and Neanderthals met after such separation, they may have recognized one another as human-like and yet unfamiliar. What survives in the record suggests contact, but not the emotional texture of contact. The cave gives us genetics, not facial expressions. It gives us ancestry, not the first cautious approach at the edge of a hearth. Homo sapiens added another thread to this human world. When modern humans expanded across Eurasia, they did not enter an empty continent. They encountered other human populations already present, including Neanderthals in some regions and Denisovan-related groups in others. The evidence for interbreeding is written into many living genomes. Many people outside Africa carry some Neanderthal ancestry, and some populations, especially in parts of Oceania and Southeast Asia, carry Denisovan-related ancestry as well. These traces are small in percentage for most individuals, but enormous in historical meaning. They show that our ancestors did not simply pass through a vacant world. They entered a human world already inhabited. In daily terms, such encounters may have involved practical matters before anything grand. Where is water? Who controls access to a shelter? Which route is safe through the mountains? Is the herd being followed by others? Has a carcass already been worked? Are these strangers dangerous, useful, hungry, sick, generous, cautious? Early human groups likely judged one another through behavior, not categories. A stranger carrying a tool can be a threat or a potential ally. A group with food can become a source of exchange or conflict. A person from another population can become a mate, a messenger of unfamiliar knowledge, or someone never seen again after a brief crossing of paths. Genetic legacy can make these ancient meetings sound inevitable, but they were probably rare on the scale of individual lives. A person might live and die without ever meeting a truly distant group. Another might encounter strangers several times near a valuable seasonal resource. Population density was low, landscapes vast, and climate unstable. Contact could cluster in certain corridors, river valleys, mountain passes, cave systems, coastlines, or ecologically rich zones where animals and humans returned repeatedly. Denisova Cave itself may represent such a node, a place where different human groups appeared at different times because the landscape around it was useful. The blurred boundaries between these humans also complicate the idea of disappearance. If Denisovans interbred with Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, then their end was not simply a curtain falling. Some of their ancestry moved into other populations. Some lines may have vanished entirely. Some may have been absorbed gradually. Some may have persisted longer in regions where the evidence has not survived. Scholars still debate the timing and pattern of Denisovan disappearance, and the daily reality behind genetic mixture remains mostly unseen. But the broad lesson is clear. Ancient human identity was porous. The human past is not a row of isolated figures. It is a network with broken, hidden, and surviving strands. The most haunting thought is that these groups may have shared more than genes. They may have watched one another make tools. They may have learned roots, materials, or techniques through contact. They may have exchanged objects, copied methods, or avoided each other while still noticing what the other left behind. Direct evidence for such cultural exchange is difficult to prove, especially in mixed archaeological layers. But possibility lingers wherever different human groups use the same landscapes. A stone tool style, an ornament, a way of working bone, a choice of shelter, each could, in theory, move between people without DNA, just as DNA could move without leaving a clear change in tools. By dusk, the idea of neighbours becomes less abstract. Imagine a group returning to shelter and seeing smoke that is not theirs. The day changes instantly. Plans tighten. People listen more carefully. Unknown places become uncertain. Whoever made that fire may be gone, may still be close, may be kin through some older connection, may be strangers with different habits and familiar needs. In that moment, the Ice Age human world feels both vast and intimate. Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens were separated by deep ancestry, yet joined by hunger, warmth, movement, and the fragile intelligence of social life. These are different branches, but sometimes the branches crossed closely enough that the future grew from both. What cannot be recovered may be the largest part of the Denisovan day. Stone flakes remain, teeth remain, DNA sometimes remains. A jaw can survive in a cave long enough for science to hear a faint signal from proteins and sediment. But the things that made a life feel like life are usually the first to vanish. Clothing decays, wooden shelters collapse into soil. Fibre cords unravel into nothing, bedding rots, skin coverings disappear, food smells fade, gestures pass with the bodies that made them. A story told beside a fire leaves no fossil unless it changes behaviour in some durable way, and even then the story itself is gone. The result is a strange silence around the most human parts of early humanity. We can sometimes know who was present, but not what the presence meant. A Denisovan evening, after movement and food processing and tool repair, would not have been only practical. Practical life itself carries meaning. The placement of bodies around a hearth, the sharing of food, the handling of tools, the decision to sleep near one person and not another, the way a group responds to returning travellers, the quiet recognition of a familiar route or dangerous place, all of these are cultural acts, even when they do not look ceremonial. Culture is not only art on a wall or ornaments on a body. Culture is the learned pattern of how to live. It is how fire is tended, how meat is divided, how knowledge is passed, how silence is understood, how a group decides that this cave is safe tonight, and that valley should be avoided until the weather changes. The problem is that archaeology preserves culture unevenly. It favours the hard, the buried, the burned, the mineralized, and the accidental. It is much less generous with fibre, sound, emotion, and memory. Denisovans may have had clothing suited to cold environments, and in many places they almost certainly needed body coverings of some kind. But what did those coverings look like? Were hides draped, tied, pierced, sewn, wrapped, layered, softened with fat, smoked, scraped repeatedly, decorated, repaired until they carried the history of many days? The evidence remains incomplete. We can infer the need for insulation in cold environments, and we can compare with other Ice Age humans, but the actual Denisovan garment is missing. A person may have spent hours maintaining clothing, and after tens of thousands of years, nothing remains but perhaps a scraper edge and a trace of hide working on stone. Shelter carries the same absence. Caves survive and therefore dominate the imagination. But many early humans would have spent much of their lives outside caves, in open-air camps, temporary shelters, windbreaks, forest edges, rock overhangs, and seasonal stopping places now erased. A cave like Denisova can preserve deep history because it protects sediments and gathers repeated use. But it may represent only one kind of place in a much wider pattern of movement. Denisovans and related humans may have built temporary structures from wood, branches, hides, grasses, bone, or stone arrangements, depending on environment. Some may have been no more than practical windbreaks, others may have been more carefully made. What survives in the record suggests that human groups had the intelligence and need to modify their living spaces, but the architecture of ordinary days has mostly dissolved. Even bedding, one of the most intimate technologies, rarely survives, yet any human sleeping regularly on cold stone or frozen ground would understand the value of insulation beneath the body. Grasses, leaves, hides, branches, moss, or other plant materials could create warmer, cleaner, more comfortable surfaces. Such bedding would need to be gathered, replaced, dried, shaken out, and protected from damp. It would shape the daily rhythm of camp life. Still, unless conditions are exceptional, it disappears completely. A person's resting place, used night after night, can vanish more thoroughly than a single broken flake dropped in passing. Then there is language. The Denisovan voice is one of the deepest missing things. We do not know what it sounded like. We do not know the rhythm of their speech, the range of their gestures, the complexity of their grammar, or the balance between vocal language, facial expression, hand movement, and shared context. Given their close relationship to Neanderthals and modern humans, and given the demands of their survival, it is reasonable to imagine rich communication. Groups moving through harsh environments need to coordinate, warn, teach, remember, and plan. But caution is necessary. Scholars still debate the evolution of language across human lineages, and the record cannot simply hand us a Denisovan sentence. The cave preserves DNA, not conversation. Yet communication must have filled the day. A gesture toward a ridge, a warning sound in the throat, a look that stops someone from stepping onto unstable ice, a repeated sign for a plant, a tool, an animal, a place, a person, a way of marking direction without words, or with words we will never know. Communication does not need to be preserved to have existed. It is woven into coordinated action. When a group moves together, shares tasks, teaches tool-making, or returns to the same locations across generations, information is being transmitted somehow. The precise form remains hidden, but the need is visible everywhere. Ritual is even harder. Modern minds often look for ritual in dramatic objects, burials, painted caves, carved figures, arranged bones, ornaments, pigments. Some Ice Age human groups left such traces, though interpretation can be difficult. For Denisovans, the case is far less clear. Ornaments and symbolic objects from Denisova Cave have been discussed, but attributing them securely to Denisovans rather than Neanderthals or modern humans is challenging, because the site was used by multiple populations over long periods. No single explanation fully accounts for all the artifacts in such mixed contexts. It is possible Denisovans had symbolic practices. It is also possible that some of the most meaningful acts left no durable object at all. Ritual does not have to mean grand ceremony. It can be a repeated way of treating fire, a manner of handling the dead, a habit of returning to certain places, a preference for particular materials, a pattern of body marking, a way of greeting, a silence observed at a dangerous crossing, or a story linked to an animal trail. Many such practices could be central to life and still archaeologically invisible. A group might carry memory in song, gesture, or spoken narrative for thousands of years without leaving one clear mark in stone. To say we cannot prove it is not to say it did not exist. It is to respect the difference between absence and uncertainty. This hidden culture also includes beauty. Early humans did not live only by utility. Even practical object can be shaped with care beyond strict necessity. A tool can feel balanced in the hand. A hide can be softened well. A shelter can be arranged comfortably. A fire can be built in a way that gives light where people sit. A path can be chosen not only because it is efficient, but because it is known, safe, and emotionally familiar. Beauty in the deep past may not always appear as art. Sometimes it may have lived in order, skill, smoothness, warmth, rhythm, and the satisfaction of things done well. So the Denisovan day, at its most human, slips away from us. We can approach it through fragments, but the centre is missing. What did they call themselves? Did they name the cave? Did the river have a remembered personality? Did certain animals carry special meaning? Did the stars guide routes, stories, or seasons? Did laughter sound across the hearth after the hard work of the day? The evidence remains incomplete, and honest history must leave these questions open. But the emptiness is not meaningless. It tells us that ancient life was deeper than its surviving objects. The Denisovans were not only bodies moving through climate, they were bearers of learned worlds, and almost all of those worlds vanished when the last voices carrying them fell silent. The strangest thing about the Denisovans is not only that they vanished, it is that a human population could matter so much and leave so little. Their ancestry reaches into living people. Their genetic story changes the map of human origins. Their relationship to Neanderthals and Homo sapiens shows that the Ice Age world was more braided than older models allowed. Their possible adaptations helped later humans endure extreme environments, and yet, when the hand reaches for the physical remains, it closes on almost nothing: a few teeth, a small bone fragment, a jaw from a high plateau, traces in sediment, clues scattered across studies and debates. The contrast is almost unsettling. Genetically, they are enormous. Fossil-wise, they are ghosts. Part of the reason is simple and unforgiving: bodies are fragile. A human body left in the open is quickly changed by weather, animals, microbes, soil chemistry, water, and time. Bone can be cracked, scattered, dissolved, buried too deeply to find, or exposed and destroyed long before anyone knows it mattered. Teeth often last better because enamel is hard. Caves preserve better than many open-air settings because they can shelter remains from erosion and create stable sediment layers. Cold environments can preserve DNA better than hot and humid ones, but even in favourable places, survival is never guaranteed. Fossilization is not the normal fate of a body. It is an exception, almost a geological accident. This matters especially for a population likely spread across varied environments. If Denisovan-related groups live not only in cold caves but also in forests, river valleys, highlands, southern Asia, or island regions, then much of their record may have formed in places hostile to preservation. Heat breaks down DNA, humidity attacks bone, Acidic soils can erase skeletal material, floods disturb layers, forests grow, die, and churn the ground. Coastlines that existed during low sea levels are now drowned beneath the ocean. A camp that once sat on dry land may lie under water today, beyond easy excavation. What survives in the record suggests only the parts of Denisovan life that time was willing to keep. Even when remains survive, humans must find them. That is another filter, and it is a severe one. Archaeology depends on where people excavate, what they recognize, what funding allows, what politics permits, what landscapes are accessible, and what questions researchers are asking at the time. A fragment can sit unnoticed in a collection for years before new methods reveal its importance. A bone can be too small to identify by shape alone. A tooth can be assigned cautiously, debated, reanalyzed and reclassified as techniques improve. The Denisovan story itself shows that discovery is not only about digging. It is about having the right scientific lens when the fragment appears. Ancient DNA transformed that lens. Before genetic methods became powerful enough to recover and compare degraded material, a small piece of bone from Denisova Cave might never have announced a new human lineage. It might have remained a minor fragment from an uncertain ancient human. Interesting but not revolutionary. DNA gave it identity. Later, sediment. DNA widened the field even more, showing that human presence could sometimes be detected without visible bones at all. The floor of a cave could hold a molecular shadow of people who passed through it. This is one of the great shifts in modern archaeology. The past is no longer read only through objects the eye can classify. It can also be read through invisible traces. But even DNA has limits. It preserves unevenly. It can be contaminated. It can degrade beyond recovery. It usually survives best in cold, stable conditions, which means the genetic record favors some regions over others. Tropical or subtropical, Denisovan-related populations, if they existed widely, may have left little recoverable DNA. This creates a dangerous illusion. The places where evidence survives can look more important simply because they are visible, while places where evidence has vanished can look empty. Scholars still debate how to correct for that imbalance. The map of discovery is not the same as the map of ancient life. Denisova Cave itself is both a gift and a complication. It preserves a deep sequence of occupation, but that long use means its layers contain traces from different human groups across different periods. Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans all enter the cave's story. Sediments shift, animals disturb deposits. Later occupations can complicate earlier ones. Dating can narrow possibilities, but not always remove ambiguity. A tool found in a layer may be difficult to assign to one group if no direct human remains are clearly associated with it. An ornament may be beautiful, but beauty does not name its maker. A stone flake may show skill, but not the hand's ancestry. No single explanation fully accounts for every object in such a complex site. This is why the Denisovan cultural record remains so shadowy. If a tool appears in a context where multiple human groups may have been present over time, scientists must move carefully. It is tempting to say the Denisovans made this or wore that or believed something because the narrative becomes richer that way. But grounded history has to resist temptation. Some artifacts from Denisova Cave and surrounding contexts may one day be securely tied to Denisovans through better dating. Proteins, residue, or DNA from associated sediments. Others may remain uncertain. The honest story is not emptier because it is cautious. It is more powerful because it shows how difficult it is to recover a human world from debris. There is also the problem of scale. A single cave can preserve thousands of years, but it cannot represent an entire population across a continent. Imagine trying to reconstruct all modern human life from one shelter, used repeatedly in a mountain valley, with most clothing, tools, food, speech, containers, shelters, and bodies destroyed. The result would be distorted no matter how careful the science. Denisovans may have had regional differences in toolmaking, diet, movement, clothing, shelter, and social life, but the fossil record gives us only scattered peepholes. Through one, we see a cave in the Altai, through another, a highland jaw, through another, inherited DNA in living people. The full landscape between them remains largely dark. Yet absence is not emptiness. It is a clue about time itself. The deep past is not a museum with missing labels. It is a vast destruction field where almost everything has been removed. Every surviving fragment is therefore astonishing. A tooth is not disappointing because it is small. It is miraculous because it survived at all. A bit of DNA is not a faint substitute for history. It is a message carried through conditions that usually erase messages. Sediment DNA, bone protein, microscopic residue, cut marks, and stoneware are all ways the vanished pressed lightly against the present. The smallness of the Denisovan record also changes how we imagine ordinary days. It reminds us that the most common acts are often the least preserved. Walking leaves no lasting trace on most ground. A meal disappears unless bone is discarded and buried in the right way. A wooden tool may serve faithfully for weeks and then rot into soil. A shelter can protect a family group through storms and leave no recognizable foundation. A story can shape behavior for generations and then vanish in one unrecorded silence. The evidence remains incomplete not because life was simple, but because life was made largely of perishable things. So the Denisovans remain suspended between certainty and mystery. We know they existed. We know they were close relatives of Neanderthals and modern humans. We know they interbred with both. We know some of their ancestry survives today. We know they occupied or influenced a far wider world than their fossils alone reveal. But we do not yet know their full range, their appearance, their cultural patterns, their population diversity, or the exact shape of their final centuries. The imbalance is the story. A people can almost disappear from the ground and still remain in the blood. A cave can hold only a few pieces and still overturn human history. Time can erase nearly everything and still leave just enough for the lost to be named. If the Denisovans are difficult to see in life, they are even harder to watch disappear. No final village burns in the record. No last cave wall announces that a people has reached its end. No ancient observer writes that the Denisovans have gone. Their disappearance is not a single scene, but a slow fading at the edge of evidence, a dimming that may have happened differently in different places. In the Altai, their traces appear and vanish within layers of sediment. In the genomes of living people, their ancestry remains, but the people who carried it as a distinct population no longer stand apart. Somewhere between those two facts lies one of the most difficult questions in human origins: what happened to them? The simplest answer would be extinction, but even that word can mislead. Extinction sounds like a door closing. In reality, a human lineage can end in several ways. It can die out because numbers fall too low. It can be absorbed into another population through repeated interbreeding. It can fragment into small groups that leave no recoverable trace. It can retreat into environments where preservation is poor. It can change so gradually through mixture and movement that later scientists struggle to decide where one identity ends and another begins. No single explanation fully accounts for the Denisovan disappearance. and the evidence remains incomplete enough that caution is the only honest way to approach the dark. Climate is one possible pressure. The Pleistocene is a restless world, swinging between colder and warmer phases, reshaping habitats again and again. A population adapted to one set of roots, animals, plants, and shelters may find those patterns disrupted as forests shift, grasslands contract, rivers change, glaciers expand, or prey animals move elsewhere. For small groups, such changes can be severe. A familiar valley may no longer support the same seasonal returns. A pass may become harder to cross. A cold phase may make fuel scarce. A warmer phase may alter animal migrations. Climate rarely acts like a single catastrophe everywhere at once, but it can tighten the margins of daily life until choices narrow. Population size may have mattered just as much. Denisovan groups, like many ancient human populations, were likely small and scattered compared with modern populations. Small groups can be resilient because they are flexible, but they are also vulnerable. If one region fails, there may not be many neighbouring groups to absorb the loss. If births are few, if resources decline, if young adults leave or join outsiders, a group can shrink below the point where its social memory and mating network remain stable. Archaeology may never show this directly. A population can weaken for generations without leaving one dramatic sign in stone or bone. What survives in the record suggests presence and mixture, but not the quiet arithmetic of survival. Competition with Homo sapiens is another explanation often raised, though it should not be turned into a simple story of inevitable conquest. Modern humans expanding across Eurasia brought their own technologies, social networks, symbolic practices, and flexible strategies. In some landscapes, they may have competed with Denisovan-related groups for animals, shelters, raw materials, or roots. In others, they may have avoided one another, exchanged knowledge, or interbred. Scholars still debate why Homo sapiens ultimately became the only surviving human species, and the answer probably differs for Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other archaic groups. Competition may have been part of the story, but it does not need to look like constant conflict. Sometimes competition is simply the slow advantage of larger networks, more connections, and greater ability to recover from local failure. Absorption through interbreeding may be the most haunting possibility, because it turns disappearance into inheritance. Denisovans did not vanish completely if parts of their ancestry entered modern human populations. Their bodies, names, and social worlds disappeared, but some of their genes continued. In this sense, the end of the Denisovans may not have been only an ending, it may have been a merging. A small Denisovan-related group meets expanding Homo sapiens. Some people join, mate, and have descendants. Over generations, the distinct group becomes less distinct. Its language, if it had one separate from others, fades. Its place names disappear. Its local stories are replaced, transformed, or folded into new social worlds. The DNA remains, but the lived identity dissolves. A people can survive biologically and still disappear culturally. This kind of disappearance is difficult to imagine because modern categories are rigid. We want to know whether Denisovans survived or went extinct, whether they were replaced or absorbed, whether they lost or blended. Deep history may not obey those clean divisions. In one region, a Denisovan population may have died out after climate pressure and isolation. In another, it may have interbred with modern humans and left a genetic legacy. In another, it may have persisted longer than currently known, hidden from us because the fossils have not been found, or because the region does not preserve DNA. the name Denisovan may cover several related populations with different endings. There may not have been one last Denisovan day. There may have been many last days, spread across Asia, separated by thousands of years. The daily reality behind such endings would have been quiet at first. A route fails more often. A return place gives less food. A neighbouring group no longer appears at the expected season. A group joins another for practical reasons and never fully separates again. Tools are made in familiar ways for a while. Then new methods appear. Old names for places are spoken by fewer mouths. None of this would feel, from inside the moment, like the extinction of a lineage. It would feel like adaptation. Loss, marriage, movement, hunger, caution, and the ordinary pressure of making tomorrow possible. There may also have been regions where Denisovan-related people endured for a very long time alongside other humans. Genetic evidence suggests multiple episodes or sources of Denisovan ancestry in modern populations, which could mean that different modern human groups encountered different Denisovan-related populations at different times and places. If so, their disappearance was not a neat chronological event. It was a mosaic. Some branches faded early, others may have lasted later. Some contributed more ancestry, others left none that we can detect. The evidence remains incomplete, and future discoveries may redraw the map again. This uncertainty should not weaken the story. It makes it more human. Real disappearances are often like this. Cultures thin before they vanish. Languages lose speakers before they fall silent. Groups merge, split, move, and change names. The final boundary is visible only afterward. For the Denisovans, that afterward belongs to us. Looking back through DNA and sediment, trying to find an ending that may never have existed as a single moment, they were present, then less visible, then gone as a distinct people, while fragments of them continued onward in others. As night settles on the ancient landscape, one can imagine a small group making choices that carry an entire lineage toward its unknown future. They do not know they are few. They do not know that their bones may not survive. They do not know that their descendants may belong to another people, speak another language, carry another memory. They know the fire needs fuel. They know the weather is changing. They know a valley has become less generous. They know strangers have been seen near water. They know tomorrow may require movement. The disappearance of the Denisovans, like their daily life, is made not only of great forces but of small decisions beneath a wide sky. Step by step, meeting by meeting, winter by winter, the people fade from the world of separate names and enter the deeper, quieter world of traces. The Denisovans are gone, but not entirely. That is the strange final turn in their story. The people themselves no longer sit beside fires in Siberian caves, no longer cross high plateaus under thin blue air, no longer move through forests, valleys, or river corridors as a distinct human world. Their tools, voices, clothing, shelters, names, and memories have mostly vanished. Yet pieces of them continue to travel inside living people, not as visible features that can be pointed to with certainty, not as a separate identity preserved intact, but as inherited fragments of DNA, small and scattered, carrying evidence of meetings so old that no story remembers them. A vanished human population still walks through the present, not in legend, but in biology. This is one of the deepest changes that genetics has brought to human origins. For a long time, disappearance seemed to mean removal. If a human group left few bones and no living community bearing its name, it could be imagined as simply extinct, a closed branch. a path that ended in darkness. Denisovan DNA complicates that. It shows that some vanished people did not disappear by leaving nothing behind. They disappeared as separate populations while parts of their ancestry continued in others. Their story did not survive as a language, a monument, or a written memory. It survived as inheritance. The pattern is uneven. Denisovan-related ancestry appears at higher levels in some present-day populations of Oceania and parts of island Southeast Asia, and at lower levels in several Asian populations. A different and famous legacy appears in high-altitude adaptation among Tibetans, where Denisovan-related ancestry contributed to a genetic variant associated with living more successfully in low-oxygen environments. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the number, timing, and geography of the encounters that created these patterns. But the broad conclusion is clear enough: modern humans met Denisovan-related people more than once, or met populations carrying different Denisovan ancestries, and some of those meetings became part of the future. At the scale of daily life, that future began in ordinary bodies, a meeting between groups, a shared landscape, a person born from parents whose ancestors had walked different paths. That person grows, moves, eats, learns, and perhaps has descendants. A small genetic inheritance passes forward, then forward again, through generations that know nothing of Denisova Cave or molecular ancestry. Most inherited fragments fade over time through recombination and chance. Some remain. A few may be useful in particular environments and become more common. Others persist quietly, neither dramatic nor harmful enough to be noticed by natural selection. Thousands of years later, scientists identify them not as memories in the mind, but as traces in the genome. There is something almost humbling about this form of legacy. It is not the kind humans usually seek. It has no inscription, no carved statue, no story recited beside a modern fire. The Denisovans did not choose to be remembered this way. They did not know that a fragment of their ancestry might help people breathe more easily at high altitude, or that distant descendants of encounters with Homo sapiens would live near oceans, mountains, cities, farms, and screens. They did not know that one day laboratories would reconstruct their existence from bone powder and ancient DNA. Their legacy is accidental in the human sense, but not meaningless. It is the residue of survival. This inheritance also changes the way we think about ourselves. Modern humans are not the untouched endpoint of a straight line. Many of us carry traces from other human groups, especially Neanderthals, and in some populations, Denisovan-related ancestry as well. This does not make anyone less modern or more ancient in any simple way. It means that human history is braided. The species that survives today carries within it evidence of relatives who did not survive separately. The boundary between us and them is therefore not absolute. It is historical, porous, and complicated. Still, caution matters. Denisovan ancestry should not be turned into a simple identity label or a romantic claim of direct cultural continuity. Genes are not stories by themselves. They do not preserve Denisovan songs, beliefs, languages, or ways of arranging life around a hearth. A person carrying Denisovan-related DNA today is not a Denisovan in culture or identity. They are a modern human whose ancestry includes fragments from ancient encounters. What survives in the record suggests biological continuity, not the survival of a whole vanished world. The distinction is important because it respects both the science and the lost people behind it. And yet, even with that caution, the legacy feels profound. A few small fossils revealed a population, DNA revealed relationships. Living genomes revealed that disappearance was not complete. The ancient daily acts described across this story movement: food gathering, tool-making, care, contact, adaptation, were not isolated moments lost without consequence. Some of them led, indirectly and unpredictably, to descendants. A person who survived one winter, crossed one valley, joined one group, or raised one family could become part of a chain, extending far beyond anything they could imagine. That is how deep history works. It is made from ordinary days that become ancestry. The Denisovan legacy also reminds us how many human stories may have left no surviving trace at all. If such an important population was unknown until recently, what else remains hidden? Other groups may have lived, mixed, vanished, or contributed faintly to the human story in ways not yet detected. Some may be waiting in unstudied fossils. Some may be present only in ancient sediments. Some may be hinted at by unusual genetic signals. Some may be gone forever. No single explanation fully accounts for the full complexity of human origins, because the evidence keeps expanding. The family tree has become less like a tree and more like a river system, with channels dividing, meeting, drying, and flowing underground. By the end of the Denisovan Trail, the question of what early humans did every day has become larger than it first seemed. They did not merely survive in a blank world. They built daily patterns strong enough to carry genes, knowledge, and adaptation across enormous time. They woke, moved, watched weather, gathered fuel, processed food, repaired tools, cared for one another, judged strangers, followed animals, remembered routes, and returned to fire when darkness came. Most of it vanished. Almost all of it. But not quite all. Somewhere inside the living human story, Denisovan traces remain, quiet and fragmented, like embers preserved beneath ash long after the fire itself appears to have gone out. The long day is ending now. The cave grows darker, the valley cools, and the ancient fire lowers itself into red points of heat beneath ash. Outside, the Ice Age wind moves over stone, grass, snow, and old animal tracks that will be gone by morning. Inside, bodies rest close to warmth, tools lie within reach. The work of the day has become silence. Food has become strength. Movement has become memory. A route taken once may be taken again. A mistake may be avoided tomorrow. A place seen in the distance may become part of the group's known world. The Denisovans do not know they are Denisovans. They do not know they will become a scientific mystery, a name drawn from a cave, a signal in ancient DNA, a question carried through journals, museums, and laboratories. They do not know how little of them will survive. They know only the nearness of others, the breath of cold air, the need to keep embers alive, and the shape of another day waiting beyond darkness. Time moves over them without mercy and without haste. Fires go cold, shelters collapse, wood rots, hides vanish, footprints soften and disappear. Voices fall silent so completely that no word remains. The cave fills slowly, layer by layer, until ordinary life becomes sediment. For thousands of years, no one speaks their name, because their name is gone. Yet the loss is not total. A tooth remains, a bone fragment remains, a jaw in a high cave remains, molecules remain in dirt. And in living people, scattered across the world, small traces of the old meetings continue to breathe. This is the quiet gravity of deep human history. Whole worlds can vanish almost entirely, not because they were small, but because time is vast. A people can live with skill, care, fear, patience, and intelligence, and still leave behind only a handful of signs. What we recover is never the whole story. It is a glow beneath ash, a little warmth where a fire once was. So the final image is not of extinction as emptiness, but of an ember, low, hidden, nearly missed, still carrying heat from a vanished flame. Somewhere in the darkness of an Ice Age cave, a hand reaches toward fire. Somewhere in the present, a trace of that ancient world remains. Between them stretches time, immense and silent, holding the fragile memory of people who lived ordinary days beneath extraordinary skies,